Good morning.
Good morning.
Today is April 15th, 2008. We are at the Aurora Public Library in Aurora, Missouri. My name is Warner Bullock. I will be doing the interview. I'm assisted today by Sandy Carr and Tom Clark on the camera. Our gentleman that joined us today, a veteran, is Calvin Hoenshell. Good morning, Calvin.
Good morning.
Nice to have you.
It's good to be here.
We appreciate you taking the time to share with us some of your experience as a veteran. Calvin, where were you born?
I was born really on the ridge in Berry County, just 1.5 miles south of McDowell, Missouri.
McDowell, Missouri. Is McDowell still around?
Yes, it is.
It is. All right. I have not been there.
Well, it's noted for its country music during the summertime.
Oh, yeah.
In an old schoolhouse there.
And where do you live now, Calvin?
I live just 2 miles south of, or 2 miles west of Aurora.
All right.
Between Aurora and Verona.
Between Aurora and Verona. Have you lived in the area a long time?
I lived here since 78.
78. Calvin, you told me you were born in 1931.
Yes.
You were able to remember, I'm sure, part of World War II.
Yes.
But you were too young to be involved in that.
Yes.
That ended in 1945, so you were 14 or 15 years old.
That's right.
Where were you at that time?
Well, I started out at my grandmother's south of McDowell, and of course, we didn't even have electricity, so we didn't have radios. We got the word from the affluent people that had radios. Yeah. and generators.
Do you remember, you were 10, Second World War started. Do you remember when you heard about that?
Yes, I do. In fact, we were in church, in a little church, and we heard about that from the minister who came from Cassville, Missouri, and had electricity and radios and things. So that was my first exposure to the world.
Did you know where Pearl Harbor was?
No, I had no idea.
A lot of people never heard of it. No. You were 10 years old. You had no electricity. How did you follow the progress of the war?
Really by second hand, up until such time as, we did have people that had radios and people that worked in the war effort, and they would come back and tell us from the towns to us.
Did you have a newspaper, or was that?
We did not have a newspaper.
No. So you were kind of at arm's length from.
We really were.
Yeah.
Right.
So you remember when you heard about what is generally considered the starting of World War II? Do you remember where you were when you heard about the end of it? You'd been 14, 15 years old?
I really don't remember that.
I
remember the joy of the circumstance, but I really don't remember that.
Again, too young to go in the service. When did you go in the service?
In 1948.
1948. You were 17, 18 years old.
I was 17.
Probably. Yeah. You went in the Air Force, is that correct?
That's right.
Was there a specific reason that you joined the Air Force?
Well, there was not a lot of work. The Air Force, I had read about the Air Force, and it was just in its inception, really,
right.
Recruiting new members of the Air Force. And so I was not loaded with money, and I thought, here's a job for a little guy that doesn't have and doesn't want any college education at this particular time.
So had you finished high school?
I had finished
Where,
high school.
Cassville?
No, at Miller, Missouri.
Miller, Missouri. Mm-hmm. How far from home had you traveled by that time? Had you ever gone very far away?
My father and mother were divorced, and so I'd been over into Kansas.
All right. So here's a young man, 17, from Miller, Missouri. You join the Air Force, and you go to where to basic training?
Went to San Antonio, Texas. I remember I was quite affluent. I had 75 cents in my pocket.
Goodness.
And a ticket to San Antonio.
And you rode to train or bus?
Rode train.
Rode to train, went to San Antonio. Were there other guys on the train that were going to basic training that you
Yes, there were.
Figured out where we're going?
Regionally, because we went to Kansas City for physicals and
Right.
mental adaptability tests.
All right.
And then they gave us the ticket and sent us on our way.
So there were some, did you know any of them?
No.
None from the area?
Well, I did. I went in with one friend. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
There was one friend
Yeah.
went in with me.
Did he go to San Antonio with you?
He
passed
did
the
go to
test?
San
and all?
Antonio.
Okay. What, did you have an idea what you wanted to do?
Not really. I just had the concept that I was going to be involved in flying aircraft, and I soon learned differently in basic training. There was a lot of groundwork.
They had a lot of groundwork as opposed to jumping in the cockpit.
Yeah.
What can you recall what your feelings might have been? You've been to Kansas, now you're on a train going miles and miles from home. What were you thinking? Oh, good, I'm glad I'm here. Oh, shucks, what have I done?
No, I was really pretty excited about the adventure until such time as I hit the ground in San Antonio, and San Antonio was so loaded with young troops that they moved us to Kelly, and we were in some old World War II barracks at Kelly Air Force Base.
Did the sergeant welcome you with open arms?
Certainly. His arms were open because he was pointing where we ought to go and telling us where we ought to be.
Had you heard that kind of language before?
Not in my grandmother's house. I'd heard it behind the barn, but not.
You're welcome, huh? So at that point, did you think, oh my gosh, or...
Yeah, this is certainly more than I anticipated at that time.
How long were you there in basic training?
I'm trying to remember, and I was afraid you was going to ask, but somewhere around 2 months. It was a short basic due to their load of young recruits.
Was it mostly physical, mental, which?
It was mostly physical.
Mostly physical, getting you in shape.
And I guess common courtesies and things, Air Force courtesies,
Right.
things like that.
Probably met some individuals you never dreamed there were any people like that, right?
Yeah, I was thrown into a group from New York, New Jersey, and I wasn't sure we were even speaking the same language.
You may not have been. All right, so you made it through there, obviously. What were you then, airman?
Airman, yes, airman.
Okay, airman. Had you made a decision what you'd like to do with the career part of it, or did they tell you?
I had made a decision, but they changed my mind because that was not available. So
what
I went into.
What did you want to do?
I really wanted to be associated with aircraft and at least maintenance and something if I wasn't, and I knew that I did not have a degree, so I would not be a pilot. At that time I learned.
So what did they tell you they'd rather have you do?
Material management. And,
what does that mean?
Well, that's handling everything from bedding, clothing for the troops, and later on in career aircraft parts, priority mailing.
Did you go to school somewhere to learn material?
I did not. I was on the job.
On the job training. Yeah. Was that a good experience, a decent experience?
It really was a good experience.
Good.
I first went in, I said material management, I first went into ordnance, which was a carryover of the Army and the Air Force splitting, and so we were working with ordnance and those things, and then later moved into materials.
By ordnance you mean bombs and bullets and,
yes,
and that kind of thing?
Yes.
Okay. From there you went into material handling. How long a time span was that from basic to material?
Oh, somewhere around 2 years, I believe.
Okay. So you got some experience.
You're right.
All right. 2 years, and you probably had a 4-year commitment originally. At what point did you decide, well, maybe I ought to stay in here?
I had a 3-year commitment.
3-year commitment.
And Mr. Truman decided at the Korean War that I should stay in another 3 years.
All right.
So at the end of 3 years, I figured, well, this is almost 30% of my total time to retire for 20 years.
Yeah.
So being kind of frugal, I decided that that was the way to go.
Right. And it makes sense.
It really did.
Okay, so you served through Korea. Did
That's
you
right.
go to
No,
Korea?
I did not go to Korea.
Did you go to the theater at all, that direction?
I did not go to the theater.
Okay.
I was a volunteer, but not taken.
Right. And all this time, were you in the material handling
I was.
end of it and so on? By this time, what was your 6 years? What was your rank at that time?
I was a E5 or a staff sergeant at that time.
Okay.
I always laugh about that. There was one of my New York friends that was a weightlifter and all these things, and he kind of lorded it over us little guys. So I thought, I've got to really work because I don't know how long I can tolerate this. So I've got to get in rank above him.
Right.
And so that enticed me to work pretty hard.
That's called incentive, isn't it?
Yeah, that's incentive for stripes.
Where were you when you made sergeant?
I was still at Francis E. Warren Air Force
Francis
Base.
E. Warren. Okay. And your duties changed from when you become a sergeant, from when you were
Went
a
into
lesser rank, more responsibility.
More responsibility and a bit more supervision of a few people.
Right. The Korean War ended. Where'd you go after that?
I went to the training command at Amarillo Air Force Base.
Okay.
And I was still in material management, but I was at organizational level rather than base level. I was handling and overseeing unit supply type things.
Had some guys working for you at that time,
Yes.
and so on. Who was your boss? Lieutenant, captain?
I believe it was a captain.
Captain.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. How long were you there at the?
I stayed 3 years, or close to 3 years. 3 years at Amarillo, 3 years at Francis E. Warren. Ended my 6 years.
Did you enjoy the?
I really did
Warren?
enjoy the Amarillo. I enjoyed Francis E. Warren, and a lot of people did not. But,
Right.
But it was.
Were you married by this time, or?
No, I was not. I always joke with my wife. She came to Texas with my mother, and so I tell her that she decided she wasn't going home until I promised to marry her. But that really is not the truth.
She came to Texas with your mother?
With my mother.
Your mother?
For a visit.
Okay. Was she a friend at that time?
Yes, she was. We went to school together, and we had been childhood friends, sweethearts, or whatever.
Okay.
Right.
So how soon after the visit did you marry her?
I believe it was probably within 2 months.
Okay, so she joined you down at the Warren base?
Amarillo.
Amarillo,
Yeah.
right. You said you were at Amarillo there at that duty station about 3 years. Where'd you go from there?
Really, I got out and went to Boeing Aircraft. I decided maybe I could make a fortune at Boeing Air Force.
Right.
Or Boeing, the company of Boeing. But at that time we had 90 days to get back in service, if any of you remember that. And about the 88th day, I had made up my mind. I was going back in service. And I think that was a good decision.
Your wife go along with that?
She really did.
Did? Good.
It's kind of amusing. Any assignment, she was always the one that was most excited. I didn't care much about traveling, but she was elated every time we went anywhere, regardless of how sad the assignment was conceived to be by the military.
Well, I think I have not experienced that exactly, but that's what makes a good military wife.
That's right.
She's excited and ready to do it.
Yeah.
You left Boeing Aircraft. You came back in. Were you able to maintain your E5 rank?
I was.
Okay. Where'd you go from there?
I then went to Offutt Air Force Base at SAC Headquarters, Strategic Air Command.
Did you request that, or did they just say, this is where you're going?
I requested Topeka, Kansas, and they moved me up there until I had an assignment back to Topeka, and then I went to Topeka, Kansas.
What'd you do in SAC when you went back in?
again, I was involved in the military, but I was involved in on the flight line with parachuting, parachutes, and all the flying material for the pilots.
Felt comfortable going back, and
I really did.
yeah, good. And at that point, you said, "This is going to be it. I'm going to be around."
That's right.
Okay. They moved you back to Topeka, and what did you do at Topeka?
That's the same thing again. I was in materials handling, material equipment for the aircraft. At that time, it was RV-47s.
Right. What year was this about, Calvin?
It would have been 54, 55.
Certainly in a heated part of the Cold War,
That's right.
and we had a true enemy, and even though we weren't technically in combat with them, they were the enemy, no question.
Certainly.
How long were you at Topeka?
About a year, and I had a chance to go to Lincoln. Of course, Topeka had been my choice assignment when I re-enlisted, and I found out that you don't always make smart decisions. Sometimes the Lord can take care of assignments better than I can.
Okay.
So I then went to Lincoln, and I really enjoyed Lincoln Air Force Base.
Still an E5? Still in material?
That's right. I believe that's right.
Yeah. Come home one day and say, "Honey, we're moving." And she said, "Okay, let's go."
Oh, great.
No.
Let's go.
Yeah, let's go.
Yeah.
Did you have any children by that time?
We had one.
Okay. Not old enough or at that time old enough to object or want to stay?
No. She was born in 54.
Okay,
So.
just go when Papa goes. What'd you do in Lincoln?
I was, again, involved with material handling. However, instead of aircraft, it was more in administrative material, supplies, logistics of that type.
Did you have, I guess maybe alerts or practice alerts all the time? Yes.
Certainly, General LeMay, for anybody that's been in service, remembers Curtis LeMay.
Right.
And I kept a bag packed, and we never knew whether we'd be home at night or whether we'd be somewhere at the other side of the world.
And this was the B-47s.
B-47s.
Okay. How long were you involved with them, and do you remember when the B-52 came on?
I do remember when the B-52 came out. I was not closely associated with aircraft at that time, but.
Well, let me ask you this. The B-47, everybody thought that was a big airplane. Do you remember the first time you saw a B-52 up close and personal?
I really do, and I just didn't understand how that thing could fly. It's
huge, huh?
Just too much.
Yeah. You remember the occasion when you saw it?
I think it was on the flight line at Topeka. I believe that's it had landed for some reason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How long were you at Lincoln?
About a year and a half, I believe, and then I got my overseas duty to Guam in Mariana Islands.
Was your wife able to go with you to Guam?
She was.
She was. Okay.
She followed after about 3 months.
How big an island is Guam?
I believe it's 30 miles long, about 10 miles wide, and we lived on the economy for about 3 or 4 months till we could get in base housing.
Were you excited to go to Guam?
I really was, but she was a whole lot more excited about it than I was.
What was your job going to be?
Again, I was in material, and
okay. I keep asking, but at some point you may have changed.
I then was in the director of material. I worked for a colonel and set his policies in motion at that time.
Okay. Did you fly to Guam from?
No, I did not. I spent 14 days on a slow boat to Guam.
Slow boat to Guam. What did you do those 14 days? Did you have a job, or did you?
Well, the job was staying upright. Being a country boy, about 3 or 4 days of that was certainly in the. We call it the latrine. They call it the head. In the head.
Maybe it's a good thing you joined the Air Force. Okay, so you eventually, thank God, get to Guam. It looks like heaven, probably.
That's right. It was certainly good to get off. One thing that was kind of interesting, we dropped off people on a landing craft at Johnson Island, and I thought, well, Guam can't be worse than this, and certainly it wasn't.
It was or was not?
Was not.
Was not. All right. You get to Guam on the ship, you're sailing to it. What was your first impression when you see?
Oh, how beautiful land looked.
Yeah.
You know, it didn't matter what it was. It just looked great.
So you get there, and your job was what at that point?
Like I say, this was, I was working for a director of materiel,
Okay.
which was a colonel overseeing the aircraft and
Was
regular supplies. I'm sorry.
That's all right. I'm sorry. Was the entire island military?
No, it was not. We had a department store on Guam. I was always impressed with that. It was a story and a half, maybe 2 stories high, about the size of one wing of the library. That was the total shopping.
Well, there was always, what do you call a person, a native of Guam?
Guamanian.
Guamanian. Were there Guamanians still there?
Yes.
Yeah, had survived the war.
They were pretty receptive to Americans at that time. They wanted to be an American, and
Right.
later on they became a protectorate.
And we probably employed a lot of them.
Yes, we did.
So what year was that you went there, Calvin?
Oh, boy, I was afraid you was going to ask that. 56, I believe, and
56,
these are guesstimates.
10 or 11 years after the war, was there still evidence of the war? Japanese
Yes,
pillboxes?
there was. We lived we lived on the economy for a while, and then we moved up to the base housing, and just in our backyard, we were not allowed to go into the jungle, and I could not imagine or explain what a jungle really is. But our worst apprehension was the kids getting into there, because within 20 feet you wouldn't have found anybody.
So it had 10 years to regrow from the end of the war and so on. You say lived on the economy, you mean lived off base?
We lived off base in a private rental.
By that time there were places for you to live and rent and so on.
Of a fashion, not anything that we would even consider living in today.
Right. What kind of aircraft did the Air Force have there?
We had RB-47s.
Still B-47?
Right, and this was Strategic Air Command.
Okay. Now by RB, that's reconnaissance, is that right?
Reconnaissance bomber, RB.
Did they have just bomber types and the RB, or was it?
No, they had both types.
Both types.
Reconnaissance and bomber. And we had a wing of Typhoon chasers also that kept everybody informed, especially
Right.
shipping.
What did you do on your time off on Guam?
Beaches were beautiful. Sand was white. The weather was beautiful. Palm trees. It was just a beautiful.
Did anybody go souvenir hunting? Like war artifacts?
We were not allowed to go into anywhere except where the military had approved it, or the Navy. The Navy was on one end of the island, and we were on the other end. We were in the north, and the Navy was in the south.
How long were you there?
2 years. In fact, my son was born there.
Okay. So he had, what, dual citizenship, Guamanian citizenship? U.S., I guess.
I guess. I don't know how. Really, I guess I was wondering about McCain, because I believe the presidential candidate McCain was born in
Panama.
Panama, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And so he has a little bit of note-taking to.
2 years, where'd you go after that?
Let's see. We came back to Houston, Texas. It was Ellington Air Force Base.
Ellington. By this time, were you still an E5? E6?
I was an E6.
E6. What did you do at Ellington? What was your job description?
About the same old thing. I went from director back to the organization level, and I was really in a advisor position to the Civil Air Patrol and the Little Red Schoolhouse, the reserve program that they got after the Korean War.
Okay.
And I had a country club assignment. I had activities all the way from Houston, Texas to the border of Mexico, and I made the rounds about twice a year to check outlying units.
So, bear with me here. You had, your function was to check on outlying units?
Reserve units.
Reserve units.
I was
okay.
an advisor to the supply personnel in the reserve units.
And country club, you said country club job. I think that was a good job.
It was really a
good job.
I guess after Guam, maybe I deserved
maybe they sent it there on free. You were there 2 years. Anything outstanding other than the great duty come to mind about that?
I was there. I believe 6 years.
Six okay, you're right. 2 years was Guam. Okay.
2 years on Guam, 7 years in Amarillo, and it was. It made it all worthwhile because it was a good assignment.
Base housing?
No, we lived
on the economy.
On the economy.
2 children at that time?
2 children.
Yeah.
Really, we'd had another one. We had another one while we were there during that 7 years.
Okay.
Third child. Yeah, it was perfect in that about the time the bluebonnets would start blooming in Texas, I would schedule a trip, because I had 2 a year, so
right.
I had to make 2 a year. So, and I scheduled my own trips, so it was perfect.
This would, after 6 years, this would take us up to about when?
65 or 66.
Which was just about the build-up of Vietnam.
Yes.
Were your friends and acquaintances and some of the aircraft going over to the Vietnam theater at that time?
Well, since we were in the reserve unit and in a training command mode, we were not involved, but the people themselves were being chosen for Vietnam.
You spent 6 years there, and then where did you go?
I got a classified assignment to go to Pakistan, and I spent 2 years in Pakistan.
Which becomes immediately interesting. What with Pakistan in the news so much nowadays, can you elaborate at all on what you did over there, or are you going to make me guess?
Well, I can tell you some things.
Okay.
I was an advisor to the Pakistani Air Force,
okay.
And we had special equipment that we utilized, and I oversaw the handling of the equipment and keeping the maintenance up on and it was an aircraft.
Right. Were we welcomed by the Pakistanis at that time?
Oh yeah. I guess, how do you get this off the record? If money was available, we were certainly welcome.
Okay. I think I understand that. Your family didn't go with you then?
My family did go with me.
They did? They went to Pakistan.
It was kind of amusing that first time this poor old boy that had left with 75 cents in his pocket ever had a silk suit. I went as an embassy personnel or a Secretary of State employee, so they bought civilian clothes. And I was really well equipped. I'd never seen clothes like they wanted me to have, so they furnished the clothing allowance. We went to Pakistan even though I was in the military, I was in the civilian. I functioned as a civilian, and when I got over there, all this preparation to buy clothing and all these things we got to her. Of course, we were privileged to have housing immediately waiting for us when we got there. And lo and behold, here was a Sergeant Hoenshell sign out in the front yard. So we don't always get everything straight, even in the service.
Back up a minute. What's the transition? You were working with the reserve units, and your background was materiel, and now all of a sudden you're in some kind of intelligence business. Did you go to any schools or classes?
No, I did not. I was still in material business, but it was material for a particular aircraft type.
Okay.
And I was advising the Air Force, the Pakistani Air Force, in how to procure parts back in the States for these particular aircraft.
All right. You had your own house with your sign in front of it. Was it out in the civilian area, or was it on base?
No, it was on base.
On base. Did you leave? Did you feel comfortable leaving the base and going out on the local economy?
I had to go every day.
Okay.
So
what about the wife and the kids?
She stayed there. She never knew what I did. And
well, I mean, did she leave the base and go into town?
Oh, she would go into town. Yeah, so she's a people person, and so it didn't matter whether it was Pakistani or what. Right. And we were affiliated with the church, and so she. I guess our house was kind of a safe house for missionaries throughout Pakistan that would come and get running water in a hot bath. Because
well, let me ask you this, especially in the light of today's world, I would assume that you were Christians.
Yes, we were.
Was Muslim a big religion then?
Absolutely.
Okay. Did you feel any of the, what's the right word, conflict that we have now apparently with Muslim and Christian? Did you?
Well, certainly they were very intransigent. They were not going to change their mind. Right. But they would try to get along since I was the boss, and they would say, again, maybe off the record, but my God is your God. And I said, no, my God's a God of love. Your God is a God of retribution. And that kind of ended the discussion.
Even back in those days, it was
it certainly was, yeah.
What's your take on our military? Were they a good Air Force?
They were a good English-trained Air Force.
Good English-trained Air Force, yeah.
They were polite, and of course, they were more divided than our Air Force in that when you got to be a senior NCO, you were almost functioning as an officer. They were strictly separated. There was two different worlds for those people.
Yeah. How long were you there?
2 years.
2 years. Were you glad to leave, or would you like to stay?
I was glad to leave in that, in some of these assignments, I had got a lot of weapons from my dad because he always said, if you don't tell me the whole truth, you've told me a lie. And in this assignment, you can understand that I could never tell the whole truth in a lot of those things. Yeah. So even going back years, my training had me uncomfortable in some things I had to do.
Right. Did your wife have any indication at all what you did?
No, she had no idea. It was kind of ironic because there was only 2 staff cars on the base, the base commander and the assistant base commander and me. And you know how the women chatter and talk. How in the world does he have a car, and she'd say, I don't know what he does. I don't know why he has a car. And so it was better that she didn't know. It was kind of funny that really bothered the officers that they knew I was an enlisted man. How did I have a staff car?
What year about did you come back or leave? Did you leave Pakistan?
67.
67. You've been in for
19 years.
19 years.
Thereabouts.
Yeah. Where'd you go after you left Pakistan?
I went to the cryptologic depot, and crypto equipment, of course, is classified equipment, and I took over the materials handling supervisor at the crypto depot, handling material.
You handled the material for the
For
code
security.
machines
Right.
and that kind of stuff. Well, I have to ask you, were you privileged to the function, how they worked, or what was gleaned out of the equipment, or just
I was not and did not want to know. I just knew
You just
that it was classified, and
make sure the machine's here?
and all of it,
and
the
what we're
assembly
doing.
was there, and
Yeah.
that was it.
Um,
Probably the most stressful job I ever had.
Well,
because,
absolutely, keeping track of that.
keeping worldwide, and you were shipping it all over the world.
Yeah.
So, without wonderful support people, it would have been really mental stress.
So if they needed a piece of equipment in Guam, it was your job to
To get it there and get
Get
it
it
there
there.
securely, under secure measures.
Did you send guards, courier guard?
Many times it was guards, couriers, and it was on military aircraft,
Right.
and so it was under the supervision.
And where was this located? What town?
It was Kelly Air Force Base.
Kelly Air Force Base.
San Antonio.
So back to San Antonio. 3 kids. Probably you spoke highly of that. Was a good duty to go back?
Yeah, it was a wonderful location.
Right.
The duty I was not really enchanted with,
Right.
in that it was so mentally stressful.
Stressful to keep track of all the stuff and make sure you got it. How long did you do that?
1 year.
year.
This assignment in Pakistan had convinced me that I wanted to get out.
Is that right?
And
Yeah.
not that it was bad duty, but it was stressful duty. The last 3 years was pretty stressful. And as you get older, I think stress, of course, I was not old. Let's see, 17, I'd have been 37 years old or 38.
Yeah. And this is about 1967,
68.
68.
67, really.
Truly at the height, or one of the continuing heights of the Cold War.
That's right.
And there wasn't much doubt who our enemy was, and we need to keep track of this stuff.
Right.
And the penalty for losing it was not
probably
attractive, was it?
was a career ending.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Room and board somewhere for a number of years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, room and
Curse.
board would have still been furnished.
Yeah, that's right. Still just a little different. All right. Did you have any incidences? Do you remember when you sent something out and a courier lost it, or?
I never was that unfortunate. However, there were times that somebody would say, I don't know where this is, but we would immediately check, and it was still under the control of security people.
I was trying to think. When do you remember the Pueblo when it was captured? Were you still in when the Pueblo got captured? Or?
I don't. I remember
It was about that time frame.
Yeah, it was somewhere close.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can imagine the stress that some guy.
Oh yeah.
Goodness.
Yeah. Goodness. Yeah.
Goodness.
Yeah.
Okay. 1967, 1968. You finished your career then?
In 1968, December the 31st.
You
So I had
remember
20,
exactly.
20 years and 6 months or
20
thereabouts.
years
in
and 6
service.
months. What'd you do after that?
I worked with my father-in-law owned a telephone company at Miller. At that time, he was one of the few dial services in the area, and I worked for him a bit. And my wife went back to, she'd already been in school while we were in service, so she went back and finished her degree, and then she started teaching, and I worked until such time as she started to work, and then I went back to school to take a soil science degree, and took a soil science degree from Missouri State University.
Missouri State now, right?
Yeah.
What, and you may not be able to answer this, but what do you think was the high point, most satisfying point of your career in the military?
Oh, I guess the most stressful but the most satisfying was the special assignment in Pakistan. And getting to know the people and working every day with them, and them working with or for us,
Right.
for me. So it certainly was a mind-broadening experience,
Right.
to say the least.
Right.
I tried to learn Arabic and had not much luck at that. So thank goodness their language of the intelligentsia is English anyway. So
Did you do much traveling in Pakistan?
I did not. I was in the northwest frontier, which is Taliban country now, and so we did go Khyber Pass and those places. But even then, tribal chiefs 7 miles out of Peshawar were still the authority, and if you wanted to go, I remember one night I was invited to a special dinner to with some people, and of course they got permission from the tribal chief so that I could go 7 miles out of town.
Well, could you take your family? You mentioned the Khyber Pass. Could you take your family?
Yes, we did.
So you'd get in a car.
Right.
But
Well, we generally rented. They had little minivans, Volkswagen minivans that we could rent for our
did you
entertainment.
drive yourself?
No.
Oh, you had a Pakistani driver
Right.
who would get you through the trials and tribulations of the local
Yes.
chief and so
Right. Well, certain areas we could go, like the Khyber Pass, certain areas that we could go to, but when you went out into the tribal chiefs' areas, particular areas, then you had to have clearance.
Were they like we hear from Iraq, the Sunnis and the different sects of religions in? Was that a big problem then? Or?
Not really, not among themselves. They were their prime problem was probably they were the Christian, in that they professed to be a democracy. They would allow certain religions to come in, but generally it was for hospitals and schools and things like that. It was for their benefit.
Well, you've got a good insight into the situation we face now. With having been
After spending
exposed to
2
that.
years working with the Pakistanis, I don't believe they've changed very little since I was there.
Right. Do your kids remember any of that being in Pakistan?
Yes, they do. In fact, while we were there, India and Pakistan had a conflict, and stray bombs landed in the housing area, and the women and children were evacuated. My wife had taken our son to a hospital, and of course our closest hospital was Madrid, Spain, so she was out of town, and I got to evacuate with the women and children, taking my kids to Istanbul, Karamsel, Turkey.
Did they come back?
They did
Shortly
come
after?
back. They did come back 3 months later,
Yeah.
and of course that was a trying time in that I couldn't make contact with my unit, and I didn't know who to contact, and so we lived in the hospital area in Madrid, Spain, for about 6-8 weeks.
Well, let me ask you this on a personal, continuing on a personal thing, but you have a house that you're miles and miles and miles away from. Were you concerned that anybody was going to break in and steal everything? Or?
I guess those things are kind of insignificant when you're evacuated to another country.
It is.
And health and keeping the family intact was a prime concern.
When you came back, was everything there?
It really was. It was there, and there had not been anarchy to the point that the Pakistanis raided the deal. So certain police and people were still, in fact, the military stayed there. It was just the women that were evacuated, women and me.
Another good duty station, right? Not really.
Not so good.
Okay, no. All right, you came back to the States. pursued a career in soil management, is that correct?
Soil science.
Soil science.
Soil science.
You got a degree in that from
I do have.
from MSU, now MSU.
Yes.
Yeah. Who did you work for after that?
I went to work for the Soil Conservation Service.
Okay. In this area?
No, I went to Rapid City. Another good assignment, Sturgis in the Black Hills. In fact, my assignment was to survey, land survey, the Black Hills.
Yeah, you got some good duty assignments.
Yeah.
How long were you up there?
We were up there 3 years.
3 years. Then you came back here?
Yes, our daughter wanted her mom to be back, and so we said as quick as Saber could, she was teaching school up in South Dakota, as quick as she could get a job here, we would come back. And so the daughter got out and found her a job, and she was contacted by the Aurora School District, and we moved there in 1978. Moved here.
Were you able to still continue with your work?
When I came back here, I went to work for the University of Missouri, and as a research scientist, soil scientist.
You're retired now from that job?
I was blessed with a retirement from the Air Force, a retirement from the university also. So.
You mentioned before we started the interview, you have a son that's in the Air Force?
No, he's retired.
Retired from the Air Force. What did he do?
He was a A&E mechanic, which is a maintenance man for the F-111s, his last assignment in Cannon Air Force Base, New Mexico.
Did he go to Guam or Pakistan or?
He went to Pakistan. We had all three in Pakistan. In fact, he was the youngest one is the one that was in Madrid, Spain, to the hospital. He and his brother had gotten a fight or gotten a wrestling match and fell off of a bunk bed and landed on his head. And so they weren't sure that he wasn't hurt worse than he thought. So that's the reason they traveled back.
Calvin, we appreciate you taking the time and sharing with us your adventures. Certainly.
It's a whole lot better to look back than it is to look forward.
At the time, yeah. Certainly the Cold War was certainly a war, even though it wasn't a shooting war. And a lot of people made a lot of contributions. And
many things were done out of futility because we were on Guam and we would travel to the south end of the island, and everybody knows that it made no difference, but probably would have made no difference, but we would travel 30 miles, and I'm sure that the bomb would have taken care of that anyway, so it didn't really matter. But out of futility, the military would do certain things to try to get
and they had to do something other than just letting you sit there and say, here it may come, Certainly some trying times for our country, and we appreciate your contribution during those times. And if there's anything that I haven't been able to, or encourage you to say, is there anything you'd like to add to?
No, I'm just thankful that I spent the 20 years in the Air Force. They helped pay for an education, which then allowed me to go into a job at the University of Missouri that I actually look forward to. I couldn't get there early enough, and my wife said I couldn't stay late enough sometimes. But that's good to have a career that you really enjoy.
There's a lot of people that can't and won't say that.
Right.
Are you in contact with any of your acquaintances from the Air Force?
I have one man that was with us in Pakistan, and he is very faithful. If I don't call him, he calls me every anniversary. That's not a big deal because his anniversary is the same date as ours, and Christmas.
Not hard to remember. I want to solicit a promise out of you. When they declassify what you did, are you going to have another interview with us?
Well, I'm not sure that it's not declassified
Okay.
now, because what we were doing is all done by satellite now.
Yeah.
That ought to tell you something. Gary Francis Powers was in the hangar and where I worked, and that's as far as I need to go.
So, you're gonna just let us try to figure it out, right?
Well, you know it if you've read the papers.
Yeah. All right, well, again, Calvin, thank you so much, and we appreciate you taking the time and sharing with us.
Thank you.
Okay.
Believe it or not, I kind of enjoyed it.
Well, we enjoyed it. I enjoyed it, certainly. Thank you.